So I'm Megan Snyder. I'm the manager of trust and governance at DigitalOcean, and I focus on helping to make sure our security and privacy programs meet the needs of our customers. This includes security certifications, information on the trust platform, and helping to define security features in the product so we can better grow as your business expands. So today, I'm going to be talking about the growth journey of your projects and kind of what aspects of security you can start thinking about as your project becomes businesses. So your security is a broad and encompassing term that definitely has evolved over the years. When I first started out helping companies secure their tech stacks, we had to use the word cyber or information in front of the security to help define what we were talking about. Now, more than ever, I think people understand that security is a more complex and varied problem. It's so complex that definitely new developers feel overwhelmed by securing their projects, and seasoned developers implement security best practices kind of unconsciously. So to bridge that gap in understanding, I kind of want to first explain what securing anything really comes down to. Think of these as the key concepts that security professionals use to determine how and when to protect, well, really anything. And I also want to call out that this is definitely based on prioritization. Some like to refer to that as risk, but I definitely like to think of it more as priorities. And so the first foundational step is to understand your project's brand of siege. Think of this as it depends on what you are protecting. The castle in this picture is protecting the community inside. I like to think of the castle as the architecture of your project. So architecting with keeping what is inside protected. Think of that as critical customer data of your project or administration rights. And you should be using kind of materials such as software and cloud providers that you trust with that data. The walls are definitely meant to keep environmental factors out, like rain, wind, and the occasional army, but it also kind of keeps what's going on inside that castle unbeknownst to an outsider. Think of that as the authentication mechanisms like firewalls and access credentials that will build into your project, and the alternative pathways and levels are lines of defense that can be used to maintain order when a plan B is necessary. These would be considered your backups as well as your isolated environments. So when understanding the how and the when, you definitely need to first identify the attack, right? General security hygiene practices are great and will get you so far. However, I would like for you to come away today with the knowledge that this is a journey that grows with your project. It is that continual improvement and automation from the start that really helps you to spend less time worrying about, is your project secure, and focus on delivering a better product for your end user. So when you have a brand new deploy, you are kind of working to protect yourself against the attackers who love to hammer at a brand new public-facing IP address. So this would be your level 1 in this chart. And the goal here is to prevent the most basic of attack vectors. Using a DigitalOcean firewall for your droplet will stop attacks at the network layer before they reach the server. So also at this stage, you're protecting against your future self, right? You want to spend the least amount of time necessary to maintain your project securely, and by architecting redundancy, automated updates, and enabling basic access control in the beginning, you can protect yourself from future growing pains as your project gains momentum and complexity. This next level of attackers, you're focusing on protecting against more distributed attacks in this level 2. This kind of next level really depends on your type of project and tech stack. I like to think of this as your project is now trending, gaining traction, but monitoring and alerting services at this stage helps you definitely understand the normal and not so normal activity. You're definitely just data gathering to obtain indicators that will help you for future reference. This is also the time where you may want to start paying attention to vulnerabilities of the platform's software and tooling you employ. A passive way of doing this is signing up for the tools that you use vulnerability feeds. So once your project has gained media attention or you're in funding stages and becoming a real business, right, you now have to kind of make a shift in how you manage your security. The more positive attention you start to receive, the more you should think about how you need to protect your customers and your businesses from potential threats of data loss or outages. The alerting you obtained in the last phase of that monitoring will be a useful tool in helping you develop your indicators of when anomalous activity is taking place on one of your services. And so We're definitely going to talk about today just kind of an overview of what are the best practices for setting up your droplet and your server to make sure you're ready for deployment. And in order to do this, we're doing that to kind of set the good foundation of support for your project's growth. So on our channel, Mason has a more detailed demo on this topic that's called Securing Your Droplet. We can link that in the notes at the end, but that will show you how to implement the features that I'm going to discuss here. So check that out if you definitely want a more detailed tutorial on the how-tos of the kind of practices I'm suggesting. So at this level 1, right, as we talked about, we want to architect and automate the basics. We want to prevent those low-level attacks and have a line of defense against the human error. So the first step in doing that is enabling SSH keys. SSH keys are the recommended way to kind of log into any Linux server environment remotely. So a pair of SSH keys can be generated on your local machine, and you can transfer those to a public key. You can pretty much add those in minutes. And if you would still like that password authentication, you should consider implementing a tool like fail2ban on your servers to limit password guesses. In any case, it's a best practice to not allow the root user to log in directly over SSH. Instead, we suggest that you log in as an unprivileged user and then escalate those privileges as needed using a tool like sudo. This approach to limiting permissions is known as least act privilege. And once you have connected your server and created an unprivileged account that you've identified works kind of with your SSH, you can disable those root logins. So do not forget to restart your server at this step. Enabling DigitalOcean's cloud firewall is definitely a simple solution to set in the beginning based on the type of services running on the server. So access to services should be set based on their function. Public services can be accessed by anyone on the internet, often anonymously. So an example of that is like a web server that may allow access to your site. Private services that should only be accessed by a select group of authorized accounts or from certain locations. So for example, a database control panel like phpMyAdmin. Internal services should be accessible only from within the server itself without exposing the service to the public internet. So for example, a database that should only accept local connections. So you can use VPC networks to organize and isolate these resources into a more secure infrastructure for your applications, execution environment, and tenancies. VPC networks also give you more control over your infrastructure's networking environment. You can select your network's IP range, set up cloud firewalls, and configure internet gateways. DigitalOcean's VPC is a great way to secure collections of resources that are isolated from the public internet. Most web servers are configured by default to display in directory indexes when a user kind of lacks an index file. So for example, if you want to create a directory called downloads on your web server without any additional configuration, all of the files would be visible to anyone browsing the directory. For most of the time, this is not a security concern, but it's very possible that something confidential could be exposed. For example, if you created an index directory on your web server for your website, the directory may contain the file for your website's homepage and a configuration file that has credentials to the website's backend. So without disabling the directory's indexes, both of the files in the folder would be visible to anyone browsing the directory. The next step I suggest is keeping your servers up to date with patches. It's a must to ensure kind of a good baseline of security. Servers that run out of date and insecure versions of software are definitely responsible for the majority of compromises, but regularly updating can mitigate those vulnerabilities and prevent attackers from gaining a foothold on your servers. I would suggest installing unattended updates on your servers so you can automate this step to prevent future vulnerabilities. Finally, backups are a great way to make sure that your deploy lives on. Frequent backups help recover data in the case of accidental deletions, so that's the protecting against your own human error, and in the event of an attack where your data is maybe deleted or corrupted. In either case, they help mitigate the risk of data loss by retaining copies of data before an accidental deletion or before an attack occurred. Defining how often the backups are required should be based on the criticality of your data freshness. In that first phase kind of feels like a lot. It kind of is because I'm trying to encourage you to use a DevSecOps model in the way you secure your servers. So by doing so, you can continually look to expand your project without having to worry about whether your foundation is solid. Okay, so now the next phase that we're kind of walking into is that basics of level 1 you've got covered. You're now able to protect more against wide-scale and distributed attacks, and this is kind of where the fun begins. We want to go up stack and use examples that may come from different products. So think DigitalOcean has one-clicks or managed databases for those who are not architecting from the beginning. Your operating system is already defined and you are utilizing a container registry of your choosing. You still have a duty to protect your stack, and that includes the ability to maintain those updated versions of your applications and your tooling. You want to start implementing monitoring tooling that will have pull-based deployment. So that will maintain the most up-to-date versioning on your container registry and those applications. This will help to maintain critical updates, but you may also want to explore monitoring and alerting tooling that will help you gather based on what constitutes misuse or abuse of your deployment. If you're using any code repositories, scanning for credentials is also an advisable step to make sure you do not have compromised services or applications. Additionally, you should try to stay up to date on any critical vulnerabilities and exposures, which are known as CVEs, for the code base or the software that you use. Make sure you understand the CVE that may impact your environment or deployment. CVEs may impact the code base, be independently fixable of other bugs, or be documented by the vendor. These are kind of the level 1 through 3 attributes, and understanding the distinction between those and identifying the impact based on a severity scale rating will actually help you feel more confident in understanding the risk of your environment. So this is the prioritization piece that I'm talking about. And finally, role-based access control is difficult to manage manually and definitely quickly requires automation. So enforcing it is best completed through automation. However, based on the size of your project and the number of engineers you're working with, this may not be a reasonable step. Understanding when access will spiral out of control is a science and an art. It depends on the sensitivity level of the data, the number of engineers on your team. I usually like to say around the 5 mark. You may want to start considering this if each engineer is working on a different part of the project. And then the desired level of security automation that will help you determine the best time to start that process. Automating these at the beginning makes it easier as you improve and grow to not have that spiral out of control as you hire and onboard more engineers. So that's level 3 is going to be around refining and maturing. So this means that you're going to need a more managed attack surface so you can scale, right? You want to crowdsource vulnerabilities, disclosures, and define alerts for your security operations, and definitely work with your customers on their needs. So if you're gathering media attention at this stage or getting funding, the likelihood definitely will increase that trying to exploit or misuse your deployment will increase. So more exposure, more problems, I guess. And this final phase will help provide you some security considerations to mature your security posture to catch up with the increased intention. Security researchers are definitely a fantastic community to tap into for this. Using a bug bounty program is a responsible way to utilize their shared knowledge for software vendors. And another alternative is making sure that your open source software or tool has a security disclosure program that is well maintained. So mistakes happen, and as your deployment matures into kind of a smaller, quite large business, you definitely want to be prepared for those incidents. So understanding what constitutes an incident with a reasonable severity scale will help your operations and know when to address a security risk. There are numerous security incident models, but the ones I've seen are homegrown and customer focused. I prefer those. They definitely have no more than 5 tiers, and they focus on balancing security priorities with the labor and cost that it takes to triage an incident. Too often when incidents are continually created, the working team will feel burned out and will lose focus on making secure decisions. Having a team dedicated to this effort will only improve the likelihood of the severity scale is continually right-sized and the incidents are managed with care. Finally, I would like to leave you with a parting thought. The trust of your deployment product is really invaluable, and quantifying the impact these steps take to have a secure deployment will definitely be wasted time. However, if you want to find a way to understand your progress, I encourage you to focus on measuring how you are gaining and maintaining the trust of your customers. I'm of the strong opinion that kind of when you focus on the end user, engage with them, understand their pain points, walk through the process of learning with them, you can do the best to protect their best interests, and you will definitely be rewarded for that. So creating a secure environment for them to use your product not only makes them more likely to come back, but also helps develop relationships that will help you inevitably when an incident occurs, because security is definitely always going to be a team effort. So with that, thank you, and I'm going to see if we have any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Megan. If people have questions now, please type them in the box and we'll answer as many as we can live. So first question from the audience. Let's see. How can you tell if someone has attempted to hack your server?
I'd like to check on monitoring. So audit logging will tell you kind of what is anomalous activity. Definitely looking into access logging depending on what type of server. We have a system configuration file that will tell you those data points. Pulling that into a dashboard is a great way to monitor that.
One audience member has a question about directory indexes. We know you covered this, but why exactly should it be disabled? It would be great if you could share more insights on this.
Yeah, so directory indexes, if you disable them, that would allow you the ability to not expose any types of files that may have credentials in them. Too often, that's a very easy way of exploitation for a potential security event to compromise the logins of your web server, for example.
What do you recommend for intrusion detection?
It really all depends on the tech stack. I think there are a lot of different intrusion detection tooling out there that are great for depending on what services you're using. I am a big proponent of finding the tool that gives you the least amount of false positives. I think there are various services and tools that are open source out there, like OSSX, that you could check out and see kind of testing it before you kind of deploy it, because if you get a lot of false positives, the value of those alerts are not going to be as useful over time.
What monitoring tools do you recommend that work well with DigitalOcean droplets?
There are many. Once again, it also depends on your operating system and the way that you've deployed. We actually do have some one-clicks that you can look at as your options, depending on what types of tech stack and offering you have. Check that out at the one-click marketplace.
Awesome. How do you prevent DDoS attacks on DigitalOcean droplets?
So the DDoS attacks are most common from actually having a public hanging IP address. What they're trying to do is just overwhelm your server with a constant accessing of that public IP address. So the firewalls are the great first step in protecting that. But over time, as you develop, different types of servers, and like I mentioned before, that alerting will help you understand when a public server is being kind of hit on, or if it's a more internal service, then your firewall should be protecting that, because you only have one port open with only a certain list of whitelisted IP addresses from that. So that's the best way to do it.
Thank you. At what level should we start to think about intrusion detection?
I would think about it at the level 2 phase. So I did talk a little bit about monitoring in that piece. And what that would do is, as you build out your tech stack, you can build that intrusion detection as part of your vulnerability program. It also depends, I think, on kind of the security needs of the stack too. I always say it depends, because it really depends on the project.
And Megan, are you able to share what happens if, let's say, my droplet is under DDoS attack? Will there be a forced shutdown, and will I be notified?
Yep, so we have a policy at DigitalOcean that if we do find some anomalous activity and we have noticed that your droplet has been compromised in some way, our abuse team will reach out and let you know that that has occurred. We give you a 72-hour period to respond back and to work with us on getting that addressed. And I really think that as long as you kind of keep our emails for that available and can easily and quickly respond, we'll work with you on getting that addressed. We try not to take any severe action without a warning first.
Is the DigitalOcean load balancer DDoS protected?
I believe that the load balancer, are you talking about the load balancer service or are you talking about the load balancer internal? It depends on the question. We secure our management network, but the load balancers we provide as a service, you would want to configure with whatever access and management you have. And then I think they are, but I would like to make sure that you kind of review that before taking me is the point.
We're getting quite a few questions about how one should handle an attack. Like what should someone do in the case of an attack? Do you have a
Okay.
plan of action?
Yeah, this is a fun one. I love an incident. I think as a security professional, you definitely enjoy what an incident means. So I always say your attack starts before you even notice it. You want to make sure that when you are going through this process, you have that incident severity scale. And so, say for example, your servers are compromised, that's going to be an incident level 1. And that will be then determining the plan of action. So as you mature and as you kind of define those severities, you want to start figuring out, okay, based off of that, in my incident response playbook, I need to define containerization. So containerize the attack, take the server offline, if it's a DDoS, or find out how they got in as the next step, right? So doing some investigation is always the critical next step. Looking at log files, understanding what actions that were taken to minimize the impact of that. And if the worst case scenario, if they've completely have gotten access to your server, I would always recommend taking that server offline, containerizing it, investigating it, and then understanding how they got in to address that specific access method. So maybe a port was open, maybe there was an issue with a vulnerability that was exploited and upstack in your software, but kind of not ruling out any root cause before you kind of identify the root cause is a really important step. And then once you've taken that step, definitely make sure that you fix whatever that you identified as being critical path of entry and then address it that way. And then only then I would take the server back online or address it. I also like to say that the final step, actually, one more thing, the final step is if this impacted your customer at all, I like to make sure that you have a way to alert that customer and or make sure they feel comfortable with the remediation steps that you've taken, because these things happen. We all know they do. And I think being more transparent to your customer that they do happen will help improve your security posture going forward.
How would you compare the DigitalOcean load balancer to an Nginx-based load balancer? Which one shall I choose? What are the pros and cons?
I am not an expert on load balancers, so I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. But you want to consider a load balancer that meets your kind of needs and also addresses the nature of your tech stack. So I think evaluating them based off of the services and sources. And our blog has a ton of great content on our community site about different options for different types of servers.
We have a general question about auto updates versus manual updates. Which is better?
Manual updates are better if you have a dedicated security team who's or an IT focused technology team that has the time and kind of support to be able to continually make sure that what they're releasing and what upgrade that they're implementing is appropriate. However, I can be sensitive to the fact that a lot of development teams run very light and there are always not those security professionals available. So if that is the case, that's why we recommend auto updates as a method to kind of address that fact.
Wonderful. We have a few more minutes. If you have any questions, please type them in the box and we can answer them now. I'm going to give it a few more minutes. We got a question about if there are any folks at DO who can help customers review their basic security deployments and advise them. Megan?
We are not a consulting company. We do not provide that level of detail, but I think we do have an extensive community site that is very useful and can help you in those processes. If you're wondering about, what does DigitalOcean protect versus what do I need to be in charge of, a great resource is the FAQs on the Trust platform. We kind of delineate there in one of those question answers how we are responsible for, some part of, the management network and that security. But depending on the level of service that you're getting and what product you're using, you would definitely want to look there and get an understanding of what you would be responsible for.
And for our customers who are tuning in who have a customer success manager, we highly recommend that you reach out to your customer success manager who can help you make those decisions and give you more advice on that as well.
Yeah.
Cool. We have a few more questions here. Do you recommend changing the default port of SSH to make it more secure?
I would recommend, based off of the type of service that's running on, that you would want to use the port that is most appropriate for that service and then protect it in that manner with that firewall. It's not necessarily about changing the port number. It's more about, prioritizing what type of service we're running on, what access it needs.
After implementing SSH key logins only and disabling root logins, would you recommend further securing SSH logins through a firewall to only allow SSH logins from a specific IP or VPC, or is that redundant?
This depends on your architecture. It could be redundant, but most times that might be a good first step if you're working on a VPC, so protecting anything that is internally run. You may run into some errors based off of the software and operating system you're running on. It depends on the operating system.
Wonderful. And we have some beginners who join us today, and they would really love to learn more about any learning resources on this topic in general. So we'll chat with Megan after this, and we'll have her add some resources to her community page. But right now, Megan, do you have any blogs or podcasts or anything that you would recommend for our beginners who are tuning in today?
I love to just look out into the security community overall and notice the trends in kind of what's going on in how we protect and deploy. I like to, if you have a focused tech stack, there are definitely bloggers out there that are focused on your specific tech stack. I know that I do enjoy kind of in my free time, OSINT is a podcast that I follow, as well as there's a security podcast on cyber that is really great resource for just general, learning and just experiencing kind of what's going on in the security community. There are definitely a ton of security researcher influencers that specify in a specific tech stack and a specific source. So taking a look out for those folks is a really great opportunity, and they're all over GitHub as well, if you're interested.
All right, thank you. Can we have multiple ports supporting SSH?
I believe so, but don't quote me. I think the tutorial that Mason gets into in that specific, he does give those dependencies in that tutorial.
I don't know if we can talk about this, but do you have plans to make public IP optional in DigitalOcean droplets? Right now it is enabled by default.
Yes, so we are looking at that on our roadmap, and we'll see. I don't know the exact timing, but it's something to consider.
All right, we have time for maybe 2 more questions, so get them in now if you want Megan to answer them live. We have one question here from an audience member. Are there any automated penetration testing tools that we can use to find vulnerabilities?
I do not suggest automated vulnerability scanners now at this juncture. I haven't seen technology that I would want to of making sure that, they're based in reality and there isn't a compensating factor involved. I haven't found one yet that I really think is great, but there is definitely ones out there that you could explore depending on what you're looking for. I think a good vulnerability program focuses on the full stack and identifies where there are known weaknesses. And so specifying a specific software source is better than a generalized scan. But if you're going to get a generalized scan, I highly suggest using a third party for that.
All right, last question. If we need to recreate a droplet from a script or from a snapshot, is there a way to transfer the IP of the original IP to the new droplet to not wait for the record updates?
I don't believe that's available at this time. So I don't think so.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to answer the questions, Megan. To everyone who joined today, thank you for tuning in. We look forward to updating the community page with some of these resources. Megan, do you have any final words of wisdom for everybody who tuned in today?
I just say, think about your customer and think about the end user of your product. That is what should guide your security decisions because the best version of your security program is always going to be involving your customer.
Wonderful. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Let us know what you'd like to learn about next, and we hope to see you again soon. Happy coding. Bye-bye.